Chapter 5. By all means, persist. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you fall now, for I's still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Langston Hughes. Never, never, never give up. Winston Churchill. Nothing takes the place of persistence. Calvin Coolidge. Emerson said, nature provides the exercise, the challenges for the development of the person. All development is the result of effort, and this effort is what strengthens the person. Life favors those who are able to stick with things when the going gets tough, because it does get tough at times. That is a part of life's challenge. Life will always be a challenge. Understand that you are not alone in facing the hurdles that life presents. To live is to live in a state of challenge. Look at the lives of many great achievers. Beethoven lost his hearing before he composed many of the masterpieces for which he is remembered. John Milton wrote Paradise Lost while totally blind. Abraham Lincoln was forced to borrow money for train fare to his own inauguration, and after years of searching for meaningful employment, a resolute and lean Albert Einstein formulated his seminal theory of relativity while working as a clerk in a patent office. Need you hear more? Poor, black, and seemingly without hope, her father peddled coal and ice in the streets of Philadelphia to pay for her music lessons. Marian Anderson still became America's most famous contralto. Dr. Selma Burke, a black woman whose depiction of Franklin D. Roosevelt appeared on freshly minted dimes, and founder of art institutes throughout the nation, received her doctorate from Livingstone College in 1970. She was 70 years old. The indomitable 9-year-old Darlene Carlisle, who was trapped in an attic in an abandoned Gary, Indiana building without heat, food, or water in the middle of winter, hung on for several days until a construction worker heard her cries for help. Though doctors amputated her legs in order to save her life, she has confronted her obstacles with irrepressible resolve. Is there anything that she cannot do? No, she proudly proclaims. And Vincent Bo Jackson, a product of a fatherless home in Bessemer, Alabama, whose childhood was a depressing portrayal of poverty and disappointment, made it to the doorsteps of Auburn University to become a latter-day Jim Thorpe. Just show him the game he can't play. He won the coveted Heisman Trophy in 1985, symbolic of college football's best. Turned next to pro baseball with the Kansas City Royals, and then to pro football with the Los Angeles Raiders. No athlete of recent times has had such a triumphant run in two major leagues. There has never been a successful or creatively gifted person who hasn't known failure, frustration, or tough times. Times when money was scarce or non-existent. Times when he or she seemed out of touch with the rest of humanity. Times when fresh ideas and inspiration didn't flow. And times when physical or emotional handicaps seemed insurmountable. The hallmark of success is the ability to ride out these moments and still prevail. Frustration and disappointment, even sorrow, can lead to joy and prosperity. Often, those who overcome the fiercest difficulties are the men and women who ultimately achieve the greatest triumphs and inspire us the most. In this lesson, I wish to discuss a principle that never fails. By adhering to this rule, you will add quality and richness to your life, eventually drawing you to the shores you seek. Without this characteristic, you can never fully enjoy riches of any kind, spiritual or material. With this principle, others will stand and view your efforts and accomplishments in awe. This element will also produce peace of mind that will never waver. The principle I speak of is persistence. Persistence means conviction, enthusiasm, perseverance, and courage in the face of obstructions. Above all, it means never stopping, never giving up, and never giving in. The power of persistence is characteristic of all men and women who have achieved greatness. It is not so much brilliancy of intellect, talent, or resources as it is persistency of effort and constancy of purpose that draws greatness to the individual. Those who succeed in life are the men and women who keep their shoulders to the wheel, who do not believe themselves overly talented, but who realize that if they are ever to accomplish anything of value, they must do so by a determined and persistent effort. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus observed, "It is not the things themselves that disturb men, but their judgment about these things." Life is a continual pattern of growth and refinement, challenge and obstacles. It has a way of sifting out the weak, the lazy, and the uninspired, those who are not able or refuse to stand on their own 2 feet in the best as well as the worst of times. Think about what happens when a master craftsman forges a steel blade. First, he chooses the strongest, most durable, and resilient steel possible. Then the metal is put through a refining fire and is heated and tested repeatedly until it is as solid and resistant as possible. Finally, the blade is honed and sharpened to its finest point of precision. The challenges that you will face are akin to this process. The hard-charging individual understands that there will always be difficulties to conquer. The achiever faces these challenges squarely and is strong enough, resourceful enough, and resilient enough to prevent them from becoming pitfalls. The type of inner stamina this requires is what I mean by persistence. It is the stuff achievement is made of. How this author discovered the power of persistence. Persistency of purpose is power. It creates confidence in others. Society believes in the determined person. When he undertakes anything, his battle is half over. Why? Because those who know him realize that he will not stop short of his objective. He will indeed accomplish all he sets out to do. His detractors have long since understood that it is useless to oppose a man who will use his stumbling blocks as stepping stones, who is not afraid of defeat, and who never, in spite of exclusion or criticism, shrink from his task. The persistent man or woman never stops to consider the costs. Whether his major purpose leads through mountains, over land, or across ocean, he or she must reach his or her goal. All other considerations are secondary to this dominant purpose. For it matters not how bright the student, how clever the innovator, or how lofty the ideal. No person of ambition will ever succeed if lacking this essential trait. Many men and women who might have made brilliant doctors, lawyers, teachers, or well-paid executives have unfortunately fallen short of their goals simply because they failed to arouse new effort at each new obstacle. Napoleon Hill says of persistence, "There may be no heroic connotation of the word persistence, but the quality is to the character of man what carbon is to steel." I, personally, went through an experience that not only confirms Hill's words, but provided me with an example which I can present to those who would convert their ability to persevere into a constructive interlude of great benefit to themselves. Let me share my story with you. When I had set about the task of writing a book on our forgotten heroes, those men and women who had built many of America's most successful black businesses, I compiled a list of 35 black entrepreneurs whom I would interview within a 12-month period in an attempt to uncover their secrets to success. Some were young, some were old, some were more well-known than others, but all were successful within their own line of business. During the months in which the material for this project was being gathered and prepared, the manuscript progressed as planned, except for one major hitch. I was unable to obtain a favorable commitment to interview Mr. Earl Graves, publisher and founder of Black Enterprise magazine. Just imagine, a book centering on the successes and failures of black men and women in American enterprise, not including Earl Graves. The entire project would have been completely remiss without the thoughts of this entrepreneurial giant. Graves is a role model in the classic American mold, a local boy who made good, the embodiment of the work ethic. As I contemplated his life, the impact of his personality and philosophy, I knew that I had to meet and interview him. I put my request in writing, prepared a questionnaire with a cover letter outlining my intentions, and immediately mailed the package to his New York headquarters. As I started my series of interviews, I received a letter postmarked New York. It was from Earl G. Graves Limited, the parent company to Black Enterprise magazine. It simply stated that I was to be commended for such a noble effort. But, and that was a big but, Mr. Graves, due to a constricting schedule, would unfortunately have to be excluded from the study. It was signed by his vice president for corporate affairs. I was devastated. I immediately phoned his office in New York from my Atlanta, Georgia home in an effort to convince either him or his staff of his much needed input. I was unsuccessful. Month after month, I repeated the same ritual. I called and sent off additional letters. They were always met with, "He's too busy," or "Mr. Graves is flattered by your request, but..." I seemed to be getting many different versions of the word no. No matter how despondent I got, subconsciously something told me to keep going. Stay with it. I would say to myself, week in and week out, stay with it. I would tell myself subconsciously as I reviewed my notes from interviews with everyone on my initial list, except Earl Graves. Stay with it, I thought as I went through my daily routine as a sales representative for a major pharmaceutical firm. Stay with it, as I coaxed back deadlines from would-be publishers. Just stay with it. I hadn't realized that 18 months had passed since my first encounter with his office. In all honesty, I had nearly relinquished any hope of ever meeting or interviewing the man. I unfortunately had to face the idea of writing a book on the state of black business with only passing comments by an individual who had done so much in this area. It wouldn't have been much of a study, but nevertheless, with my hopes frayed and sagging, I had resigned myself to that fate. Experience has taught me that a man is never quite so near to success as when that which he calls failure has nearly overtaken him. For it is on occasions of this sort that he is forced to think. If he thinks accurately and with persistence, he discovers that so-called failure is usually nothing more than a signal to rearm himself with a new plan or purpose. Most real failures are due to limitations that men set up in their own minds. If they had the courage to go one step further, they might discover the key to the door of all they desire. I searched vainly for a solution to my dilemma. The answer finally arrives. I had found the key. I suddenly realized in my despair that maybe, just maybe, there was a way for me to succeed in my mission. I remembered a conversation that I had years ago with a friend of my parents who had met Graves. Not having communicated with this individual for a number of years, I obtained his phone number from operator assistants and spoke with him in his New Jersey home. In our conversation, he vaguely remembered our talk, but he informed me that he was invited to the silver wedding anniversary of Mr. and Mrs. Earl Graves, to be held the coming weekend at their Connecticut home. This was my chance, and I planned to seize it. In my haste, I had briefly told him of my desire and asked him a huge favor. Could he possibly hand-deliver a letter addressed to Mr. Graves, either before or after the ceremony, from me? After a brief pause, he consented. Now I had to send my contact the letter via special delivery for Graves to receive it the coming Saturday. My hopes were resurrected. As I prepared this correspondence, I thought of those powerful words that were leading me to the successful completion of my objective. I reflected on the many times I had muttered it to myself, "Stay with it." I tell you of this experience simply because the world is full of those who try to get out of the doldrums and, meeting with difficulty, and repeated turndowns, retreated back to the crowd. Nothing takes the place of persistence. I realized that staying with it had paid off, just like it always does. To my good fortune, Earl Grey's was given my letter, as planned, shortly after his anniversary ceremony. Within a few days, I received a phone call, ironically from the same vice president who had delivered disappointing news 18 months prior. But this time, she was calling to arrange a mutually beneficial time for an interview. Her exact words were, "Mr. Graves would be most delighted to talk with you." It was during my meeting with Graves that I uncovered the power of this principle that could only have been revealed in this fashion. As I waited in the foyer of his company's headquarters on New York's Fifth Avenue, I sensed success. Neatly displayed throughout the hallway were plaques, mementos, awards, and framed clippings highlighting Graves' 20 years of achievement. My unashamed gazing was interrupted by his personal secretary. "Mr. Graves will now see you," she said, and I was led to his office. Though I had interrupted his dictation to a staffer, Graves seemed unconcerned. He caught one glimpse of me, complete with briefcase and questionnaire, dropped his notes, and extended his hand in an expression of warmth and hospitality. Then came those words which I shall never forget. "Young man, you are to be commended for your persistence. If you are not in sales, you should be. Stay with it. Persistence is another form of faith. There is a place for anyone who will persevere. There is success lurking in everything we do. In every conflict there are a few people who exhibit staying power, and this staying power nearly always represents the difference between prosperity and the settled for lifestyle. Boldness of spirit and tenacity of purpose accompany those whose acts are in accord with greatness. A man or woman who refuses to quit, who keeps going in the face of defeat, who does his best against superior forces, strikes within us a sympathetic chord. Opposition comes to the man who aspires. He does not turn away from the challenge, nor assault or deny its appearance. Though the ostrich hides its head from impending danger, and the possum topples over and plays dead, the inspired individual neither turns away nor ceases in his efforts. Patiently, with a persistence that never tires, he examines his own mind to determine how his understanding is blocked from the true perception of the encountered obstacle. He will grow because he must, and when his period of growth is over, he will find himself beyond his stumbling block. Looking back along the path he has traveled, he will not even find his obstacle, for what he didn't know seems simple when understanding has been achieved. We are all aware that life at times is not easy, that the lessons it teaches are often learned through pain and tension. In addition, we realize that those who aspire for the brass ring will encounter obstacles. This is a tribute to courage and perseverance. But greater than courage is persistence, the willingness to stand and keep trying. By persistence, the patient positioning of determined lives, barred doors eventually open and stone walls crumble. One drop of water gently wears away the granite. The tender flower emerges through the concrete and lifts its petals towards the sun. By persistence, the great pyramids of Egypt were built, offering civilization a springboard to even greater knowledge. By persistence, African missionaries were able to survive long, trying periods before ever obtaining a convert. By persistence, Ira Aldridge, Black America's first internationally known actor, swallowed his pride and endured many unobtrusive years in Europe and Russia, often performing without compensation before hitting his stride in the United States. By persistence, Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, educator, philosopher, and author of numerous books and scholarly articles, was able to pursue his college studies after graduating from high school, a grown man of 22. By persistence, Charlene Hunter Gold achieved her dominant purpose of obtaining a degree in journalism. This well-known news reporter of the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour risked life and limb in 1961 by enrolling as the first black female at the University of Georgia. Her pioneering determination and persistence was rewarded in 1986, the 25th year after her arrival on the campus, when her alma mater bestowed her with television's highest honor, the George Foster Peabody Broadcasting Award. By persistence, Beverly Johnson, the strikingly attractive New York model, challenged the fashion industry which ignored the natural beauty of black women. "You're not qualified to model," agencies and designers rebuffed, but after scanning countless fashion magazines and pounding against many doors, Johnson declared, "If those girls can do it, so can I." Over the years, her face has lured advertisers and consumers alike, while her good looks have graced the covers of the most widely read newspapers and magazines. What kept Beverly Johnson going through the early years of disappointment? A large dose of persistence. It was through persistence that Louis Armstrong cracked open the first door to his future, a future that stood far from the poverty and ignorance that he knew all too well. As a stubborn and hot-tempered boy, he was sentenced to 2 years in a reform school for assault. Determined to salvage his life, which was spinning dangerously out of control, he taught himself, note by tedious note, to play the trumpet. For the next 50 years, Louis Armstrong would teach others the world over the power of love and music, fashioning the title Goodwill Ambassador. And it was by persistence that Shelton J. Lee, better known as Spike Lee, made bold statements about controversial, unpopular topics that major filmmakers were reluctant to bring to the big screen. In the rocky world of movie production, Lee persevered and patiently waited for his opportunity to come by producing entertaining and provocative movies on shoestring budgets. As a young black producer with a succession of box office hits, Lee is on his way to becoming one of the giants of the film industry. Persistence, he says, is one of the keys to the kingdom. These are just a few in the growing ranks of black achievers who have succeeded by application of this vital principle. Now, will you persist in the face of your most formidable obstacle? If you find you are weak in this critical area, you may want to reread the lessons on desire and fate before applying the instructions below. Do you persist? Imagine for a moment that you are taking a personal inventory. Begin an accounting of the many blessings in your life. Here lies an opportunity for you to grasp one of your most prized possessions. Have you realized the vast treasure buried within persistence? Can you recall an occasion in your life where you persisted in the face of difficulty until you succeeded? Do you remember the joy of triumph, the sweet taste of victory? Of two men, one brilliant and with little patience, the other of average intelligence but great persistence, the second is far more likely to achieve grand results. Sooner or later, the man or woman who persists will succeed. Do you persist? Here are a number of questions that will allow you to measure yourself against this all-important element. Answer these questions openly and honestly in order to uncover those areas of your life where you may lack persistence. Number 1. Reflecting on my life, I can cite specific cases where I have achieved something of note simply because I persisted. Number 2. Do I persist in my occupation or line of work? Number 3. Do I persist in the area of personal development? Number 4. Do I confront my obstacles or shrink from them? If you have within you the ability to persist, you possess a priceless treasure. Consider for a moment these words written by Calvin Coolidge more than 60 years ago. They are just as penetrating today. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unregarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. You may wish to check the stories of A.G. Gaston, S.B. Fuller, Madam Walker, George Washington Carver, Mary McLeod Bethune, C.C. Spaulding, Ron LaFleur, Alonzo Herndon, and Leontine Price to recognize how each applied persistence in their lives in addition to the other principles which contributed to their success. As you continue to read and analyze the case histories illustrated in Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice, pay close attention to how the priceless quality of persistence kept the glowing flame of desire lit until it could be fanned into a searing laser. Understand failure. We hear a fair degree of talk about genius, talent, and luck playing a large part in an individual's success. All are important factors, yet the possession of any or all of these traits, unaccompanied by a definite aim or purpose, will not ensure success. Men and women drift into business, they drift into politics, they drift into religion. If the winds and tides are favorable, they continue to drift through life. That's a big if. But what if the winds and tides are not favorable? Whatever else may have been lacking in those whom we aspire to emulate, those men and women who have been conspicuously successful have all had one characteristic in common: doggedness and determination in the face of failure. Failure's true nature. To the common man, the word failure has a negative connotation. For this reason alone, failure has brought unnecessary grief and hardship to millions. But the refining fire of failure can also be the great educator of success. Most of us learn through episodes of trial and error, consequently transforming failure into a prerequisite for achievement. The wise and ambitious always seek to learn something of value from each mistake. The loser, trapped within a hypnotic web of the fear of failure, gains nothing from the attempt and eventually comes up short. Look again at your failures. What you may label a failure may be only a temporary setback. Moreover, examine this minor stumbling block to see if it is really a defeat. It may be a blessing in disguise. Every adversity, every disappointment, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equivalent benefit. As a great philosopher has said, God never takes anything away from anyone without replacing it with something better. Thomas Watson, the founder of IBM, was asked to offer his secret to success. In straightforward terms, he barked, "Double your failure rate." In other words, increase the number of risks you are willing to take. This is the most expedient way knowledge is generated. Neither temporary defeat nor adversity amounts to failure in the mind of the person who looks upon his setback as a teacher that will reveal much needed lesson. As a matter of fact, there's usually a good and lasting lesson in every reverse and in every defeat, if we only search for it, and often enough it is a lesson that could not have been learned in any other way. "We've wasted so much time," shouted a young assistant to Thomas Edison. "We've tried 10,000 tests, and we still haven't found a material that works." "Ah," responded the inventor, "but now we know 10,000 things that won't work." Failure is, in a sense, says John Keats, the 19th century English poet, the highway to success, inasmuch as every discovery of what is false leads us to seek earnestly after what is true, and every fresh experience points out some form of error which we shall afterward carefully avoid. The lesson of failure. My conversations with some of America's leading achievers have confirmed this hard truth. If it is success you desire, failure is unavoidable. There are no substitutes for the lessons learned in the school of hard knocks. You should seize every opportunity to learn from your mistakes. Theorists and psychologists have long agreed on the benefits of failing. Dr. Irene Casorla writes in Go For It. Winners make friends with failure and acknowledge the valuable lessons that it teaches. Failures often offer valuable information and are helpful guides, not signals to give up. Dr. Casorla explains that failure is a part of the success pattern. No one achieves their goals in one straight climb, she continues. It's more like a jagged, uneven ascent with curves and plateaus. In his best-selling book, Creating Wealth, real estate expert Robert Allen quotes super salesman Herb True. Successful people often experience more failures than failures do, but they manage to press on. Allen, who built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire himself, says, one good failure can teach you more about success than 4 years at the best university. Failing just might be the best thing that ever happens to you. Arguably, one of the leading works in his field is The Magic of Thinking Big by psychologist and college professor Dr. David Schwartz. Schwartz tells what he discovered about failure from interviewing social workers and public officials who have frequent contacts with the indigent. We have all seen poverty and those struck by it, Schwartz explains. These are the maligned, defeated, and bottomed out people of the world. Men and women, young and old, some highly educated, some not, but all staggered by one of life's many blows. Schwartz learned that their personal tragedies are not significantly different from those who have experienced success. Many times during his research he heard, I lost my job and my wife. I lost everything in a bad business deal with my best friend. My husband became ill and we were wiped out. These themes of hardship also turned up in the lives of achievers who learned by failing and went on to gain valuable experience and clearer insight. Blessed failures. The fine line between winning and losing is often drawn by our perception of failure. To the downtrodden who sleep in public restrooms and on park benches, failure represents the end of the road. They interpret one of life's catastrophes as a kind of personal annihilation and allow it to totally destroy their sense of self, of purpose, and of relationships. The man with a purpose, on the other hand, is able to accept failure as a temporary setback or distraction and use that experience to improve his performance. Failing can present life's most valuable lessons. Over and over, I've heard declarations like, getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to me, or the divorce, although a terrible blow, forced me to grow up, and now I'm a better person. No one sets out to fail. It's something we dread and make every effort to avoid. But if we are to succeed, we must take risks and seize new opportunities, which can inevitably bring challenges and adversity. Schwartz argues again, it isn't possible to win high-level success without meeting opposition, hardship, and setback. But it is possible to use setback to propel you forward. Notice how some prominent failures have confidently drawn upon their defeats as learning experiences, while sticking steadfast and true to their ultimate goal. The miracle worker. The television cameras had gone, and Benjamin Carson, MD, was off the world's front pages, at least temporarily. The media had apparently decided that this understated, compassionate young man was a miracle worker. First, he performed a rare brain operation that had saved the life of a hydrocephalic baby still in the womb. Then in 1987, he was part of a medical team that separated Siamese twins born joined at the skull and sharing major blood systems in the brain. The operation left each twin alive and intact. Today, Dr. Benjamin Carson is Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center in Baltimore, Maryland. A Yale University graduate who has won 2 of the most prestigious awards in surgery, he is a legend in his field. But just 20 years ago, he was a poor black teenager in inner-city Detroit who nearly threw his life away. I had an explosive temper, Dr. Carson recalled. It was out of control. When I suspected someone of infringing upon my rights, I went to great lengths to ensure that they suffered as a result. I'd use whatever was available, rock, hammer, or bottle. One day I was stabbed One day I stabbed another teenager with a camping knife. Fortunately for me, his belt buckle stopped the knife from penetrating. Trembling and in tears after I realized what I had done, it finally struck me that had it not been for his belt, I would have probably be either in prison or dead. This was the turning point of my life. Ben Carson was the second son of divorced parents. His mother worked 2 and sometimes 3 jobs to keep the family together. More important, she worked hard to convince her boys that they could make something of their lives, even if their environment was telling them they couldn't. We got loads of negative input, Dr. Carson remembers, but thankfully our mother offset those negative images with positive words of encouragement. You might say she brainwashed us into believing that we could do anything. As a part of a specialized educational program in a predominantly white suburban junior high school, Ben did so well in the 8th grade that he won an award as the top student in his class, proving what his mother already knew. But his success was short-lived when the program ended. After transferring back to the troubled inner-city public school, he assumed the dead-end ways of his peers. My friends were experimenting with all types of drugs and used crime to support their habits. As ridiculous as it seemed, their influence began to rub off. I started to emulate them. I wanted to be part of the crowd. Soon his grades and attitude plummeted, and what looked like a bright future began to dim. His mother worked on him constantly and convinced her son that he was headed nowhere fast. After a year, he agreed. He soon shifted his focus and began to apply himself. In storybook fashion, after 3 years of hard work, he graduated with honors and won a scholarship to Yale. But the Ben Carson story doesn't end there. Pitted against many of the brightest students in the nation while adjusting to a new environment and tough curriculum, Carson had trouble at Yale. As a pre-med major, he came alarmingly close to flunking out his first year. I realized I had to manage my time and redouble my efforts. I had climbed so many mountains, overcome so many obstacles. I wasn't going to quit now. This was the attitude that propelled Ben Carson through the medical school, internship, and into a series of prestigious posts. Dr. Carson looks back over his career and offers the following advice to anyone confronting failure. The big difference between people who succeed and those who don't is not that the successful don't encounter setbacks. Everybody has setbacks and roadblocks. If you look at obstacles as boundaries that prohibit your progress, then you're going to be a failure. But if you look at them as hurdles that strengthen you each time you clear one, then you're going to be a success. Dr. Carson cleared his hurdles with a combination of persistence, courage, and compassion. He is something of a marvel in the medical profession. He has always resisted the opportunity to earn many times his income in private practice. Instead, he stays in the academic medicine, searching for new challenges. In 1987, just out of curiosity, he read an account of 21 sets of Siamese twins joined at the head, whom surgeons had tried to separate. In the majority of these cases, one child survived, but the other child died or was mentally destroyed. The problem he saw was the mammoth loss of blood the operation entailed. If he was ever involved in such a case, he would stop the baby's circulation beforehand, lower their body temperatures, then operate. But the chances of his ever seeing such a case, he thought, were minute. 3 weeks later, a West German doctor arrived at Johns Hopkins with the records of a pair of Siamese newborns from his native country. Their mother was unwilling to sacrifice either child to save the other, but no surgeon in Europe knew any other method to separate them. Dr. Benjamin Carson was called in to consult. I looked at the charts and x-rays and said, yeah, I can do this. The operation took 22 tension-filled hours, and for 14 of them, Carson worked as a leading member of a 70-person team, some of whom were doctors senior to him. What gave him the courage to step forward and tackle an operation so difficult and brimming with the possibility of failure? The same quality he discovered earlier in his career. I guess I would have been afraid if I didn't have so much faith in God and my ability to overcome failure. In like manner, you may control your destiny to an astounding degree simply by exercising your privilege of overcoming setbacks and failure. To the same degree that Dr. Carson transformed his life, you too can make life pay off in your terms, engaging in the sort of work best suited for you. How? By taking a critical view of your failures and defeats, hitting the mark by failing. How did Grambling University football coach Eddie Robinson hit his mark? By applying the same philosophy. College football's 300-win club consists of only 4 members: Glenn Pop Warner, Amos Alonzo Stagg, Paul Bear Bryant, and Eddie Robinson. Robinson's record is the cornerstone of a legacy that he built with hard work, sacrifice, and persistence. I have no secrets save persistence, says Grambling University's head football coach. People look at my record and are awestruck by the 300 wins. They never realize that I lost more than 100 games. When I began coaching 40 years ago, I did everything to keep the football program going. I mowed and landscaped the grass at our stadium. I repaired equipment and even taped my players' ankles. I did whatever needed doing. Persisting through many tough times was a big part of my job. With more than 350 wins to his credit, and currently the all-time leader in college victories, Eddie Robinson knows a good deal about the subject of failure and success. There can be no such thing as permanent defeat for the man or woman who accepts adversity as a stepping stone to success. Life seems to have been designed so that every man who achieves great success must first undergo a testing period, sometimes many of them, through which he is tested for courage, faith, endurance, and a capacity to overcome. The persistent man never stops to consider whether he is succeeding or not, says Mr. T. Everything must be sacrificed for the attainment of the goal. Born Lawrence Turod on Chicago's South Side, he was no stranger to life's recesses. The 10th of 12 children, deserted by their father, he was raised by a loving mother. For the better part of a decade, his family hung on grimly, barely surviving on his mother's sporadic earnings and a monthly welfare stipend. Home was a 3-room apartment in a public housing project. But like many fatherless boys of the Chicago slums, Lawrence was a fighter. He refused to succumb to life's difficulties and wasted no time with self-pity. Thanks to his determination, persistence, and belief in the Almighty, Mr. T, as he is now known, earns a handsome income in the world of entertainment and is seen by millions. Adversity was the yardstick by which he assessed his weaknesses. It also provided him an opportunity to balance his shortcomings. Poverty is not a curse, it's a motivator. In this sense, adversity and defeat proved to be a blessing. Adversity and achievement. There are 3 types of people in the world, said the inspirational writer Orison Swett Marden. There's the wills and the won'ts and the can'ts. The first accomplish everything, the second oppose everything, and the third fail in everything. Dare to make a start. All the best laid plans in the world will not help you as much as conquering the smallest obstacle in your path. And this book will not have served its purpose unless it demonstrates your ability to do so. On every hand, we see those who have turned back, people who have desire and enthusiasm enough to begin, but who were unable to overcome their adversities. Your ability to press on, to persist, to continue long after everyone else has turned back is a good measure of your possible success. Don't be led astray by the so-called odds against you or the obstacles blocking your path. These are old cliches. The doers of the world don't let such considerations deter them. If they had, they would never become such notable examples. You too have it within yourself to succeed. Monitor your thoughts and attitudes. Take stock of yourself and your resources. If you are reading Think and Grow Rich, a Black Choice, with the intention of applying the principles it conveys, you will discover that lack of persistence is one of the major causes of failure. While the starting point of all achievement is desire, your desires may either be increased or diminished by the amount of persistence you apply to your goal. As history demonstrates, the lack of persistence is a common weakness in many men and women. Never forget the inspiring words of philosopher and writer Edmund Burke. He that wrestles with us strengthens us. Our antagonist is our helper. If you are in need of persistence, build a stronger fire under your goal and stoutly assert your divine right to attain it. Believe you are made for the place you occupy. Hold your head up, put forth your entire energies. Conquer or be conquered. Have you ever seen a man who had no quit in him, who would never let go his grip no matter what happened? Who, every time he encountered defeat, would come up smiling and with increased determination to forge ahead? Have you ever seen a man who did not know the meaning of the word failure, who never knew when he was beaten, who had erased the words can't and impossible from his vocabulary? The man who no obstacle could stop, who was not disheartened by misfortune. If you have, you've seen a conqueror. It is always of interest to watch a youth's first taste of failure. It is the index to his life, the measure of his success power. A man's real courage, said Napoleon Hill, shows to best advantage in his hours of adversity. The mere idea of his failure is not as important as how he takes defeat. What does he do next? Was he discouraged? Does he conclude that he made a mistake in his present undertaking and rush to attempt something else? Or does he stand firm? No one is immune to failure, and everyone meets with it eventually during a lifetime. Nevertheless, each of us has the means by which we can overcome our failures. Remember, you have control of the greatest tool ever known, your mind, and you alone control its processes. Failure usually affects people in one of two ways. It serves as a challenge to greater effort, or it subdues and discourages you from trying again. The majority of people give up hope and quit at the first sign of adversity, even before it overtakes them. For instance, a significant number of black Americans are born into poverty. Living in a world of abundance, many accept their lot as inescapable and go through life wearing deprivation as an albatross. However, it may very well be that poverty is one of life's testing devices. Whether it becomes either a blessing or a curse depends upon the manner in which it is received. It has also been said that failure is part of nature's plan, through which it prepares men and women of destiny to do its work. I have found much evidence to support this theory. One of the first lessons of life is to learn how to snatch victory from defeat. It takes courage and stamina, when unsure and embarrassed by humiliating disaster, to seek in the ruins the elements of success. Yet this is the true mark of achievement. This measures the difference between those who succeed and those who don't. You cannot measure a man by his failures. Instead, you must know what he makes of them. With this in mind, it was Confucius who proclaimed, "A man is great not because he hasn't failed. A man is great because failure hasn't stopped him." The leader is never subdued by failure, but is always inspired to a greater effort. By contemplating your failures, you will discover whether you have the potential for leadership. Your reaction will render a dependable clue. Nature often pummels aspiring men and women with adversity in order to find who among us will get up and make another go of it. Those who make the grade are people of destiny, programmed to serve as leaders of importance in today's world. The next time you encounter failure, remember that every failure and every adversity carries within it the seed of an equivalent benefit. Begin to recognize that seed and plant it through action. You may discover that there is no such reality as failure until you accept it as such. You may explore the secret of persistence by uncovering the 10 most prevalent causes of failure. Number 1, lack of a definite purpose, goal, or chief aim. Number 2, lack of ambition to move past mediocrity. Number 3, a negative mental attitude. Number 4, lack of self-discipline. Number 5, lack of vision and imagination sufficient to recognize favorable opportunities. Number 6, the use of race, sex, or circumstances as a reason for inactivity. Number 7, lack of belief in the existence of infinite intelligence. Number 8, ill health. Number 9, lack of persistence in carrying through to the finish that you start. Unwillingness to go the extra mile or render a service. The habit of running away from unpleasant circumstances instead of mastering them. Number 10, the desire to get something for nothing. You can make the grade. Napoleon Hill had a clear vision of the potential power in persistence when he said, "Those who have cultivated the habit of persistence seem to enjoy insurance against failure. No matter how many times they are defeated, they manage to move toward the top of the ladder. Sometimes it appears that there is a hidden guide whose duty it is to test men through all sorts of discouraging experiences. Those who pick themselves up after defeat and keep on trying arrive. The hidden guide lets no one enjoy great achievement without passing the persistence test. Those who can't take it simply do not make the grade." From birth to death, life poses a constant challenge to those who master failure with persistence, and it rewards with riches the men and women who successfully meet those challenges. If you accept defeat as an inspiration to try again with renewed confidence and determination, the attainment of your success will be only a matter of time. If you accept defeat as a final blow and allow it to destroy your confidence, you might as well abandon any hope of success. Remember the words of the 19th century American social reformer and writer Jacob Riis, who wrote, "When nothing seems to help, I go and look at the stonecutter hammering away at his rock perhaps 100 times without as much as a crack showing in it. Yet the 101st blow it will split in two, and I know it was not that blow that did it, but all that had gone before."